This program is supported by H.R. Clough and Kearsarge Heating. Their full-service model offers oil delivery, propane, motor fuels with design, installation, service, and maintenance of all types of oil, gas, and alternative energy systems, as well as air conditioning, water conditioning systems, and backup generators. H.R. Clough and Kearsarge Heating. Echo Communications, a digitally integrated commercial printer and mailer located in New London, New Hampshire since 1997, with roots going back much further as the country press, AccuMail, and the home of the Kearsarge shopper. Echo Communications. Main Street Bookends of Warner, for books, toys, games, cards, gifts, and a gallery of local art. Main Street Bookends of Warner. The Innertown Record, your weekly hometown community newspaper covering the Kearsarge Sunapee Sunshine region of New Hampshire. The Innertown Record.
I'd like to welcome all the voters who have come out to hear their candidates. And I want to thank all 4 candidates for the District 7 State Representative position, also for coming, also showing up. We have a few little rules we'd like to explain to you. This is a forum, not a debate. The purpose is for candidates to meet the voters and make their views known. So the way that it is set up is I will be calling on every candidate for the same question. And we will rotate the order of response. I'll begin with Karen for the first question, and then I'll go to Claire for the second question, and so on. There will be time limits, and sitting in the center, if you see somebody waving a folder, that's our timer, Nancy Maracchio, to keep them within the time limits. They have 3 minutes for their opening statement. After that, 2 minutes for every question, and no questions have been supplied to the candidates ahead of time. And if you have a question that you would like to ask, Janet Haynes will bring you a card and pick it up, and we'll try and fit it in with the questions that we have. So with all that said, let me begin with introductions. We have Representative Karen Ebel, Claire Kettler, Greg Sargent, and Dan Wolf. So there are 4 candidates up there for 2 positions. Would you care to begin your opening statement?
Okay, my name is Karen Ebel. I'm running for my 6th term to represent the towns of New London and Newbury, and it's been my honor to do that, and I hope you'll consider supporting me. As many of you know, I currently sit on the Public Works and Highways Committee, which oversees the capital budget and infrastructure, including roads and bridges, and I'm the chair of the Solid Waste Working Group for the state, which has oversight over solid waste issues. We're going to be talking a lot about issues tonight, and I thought for starters I should really talk about what I consider my job number 1, and that is constituent service and supporting the municipalities that I represent. And I just wanted to discuss what I've actually done over the last decade. I passed a bill that basically transformed reading instruction requirements for children with dyslexia, including early screening, and that started with constituent concerns, and it's improved reading screening for all children in the state. I passed a bill that enabled the disabled to vote that was initiated by Jessie Levine, who could not write, and she was having trouble with absentee ballot voting, and I worked closely with the Secretary of State on that. I worked closely with DOT and the Attorney General's office to initiate the transmission of security feed to our local police from the Park and Ride. That was a request that was initiated by constituents and my town. I worked closely with DOT and my House committee to obtain funds to expand the Park and Ride over the past several years, and I'm happy to say that $650,000 in federal funds have been appropriated, and that's just been approved and due to start any minute. I successfully fought for the Wild Goose boat ramp to go away, first with Representative David Kidder and later with Representative Dan Wolf, that had been hanging over our area for decades. It was extremely contentious in my committee, and we recently got funding that I worked hard on with Dan to repair the boat ramp and to expand the parking at the Sunapee State Beach. I initiated bipartisan monthly listening sessions in my first term. It's considered a model of civility and openness that the League of Women Voters itself has promoted around the state. Lastly, I'm a state leader in the reassessment of statewide solid waste issues because the state lags behind the rest of the area. Half of the trash coming into our landfills comes from out of state. My record clearly supports that I strongly support public education, public health, a better environment, renewable energy, reproductive rights, personal autonomy, measures to improve gun safety, and protecting our voting rights. I work diligently and bipartisanly across the aisle, and I would appreciate your vote in November. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kettler.
Hello, my name is Claire Kettler, and I'm running for the New Hampshire House to represent New London and Newbury. I'm very pleased to have an opportunity to introduce myself to the voters. Thank you for having this forum. I've lived on Chalk Pond Road in Newbury since 1990, and I raised 2 children that graduated from the Kearsarge School District. I've been a registered nurse for 23 years. I have a master's in nursing, and I started my own nursing business last year, having previously worked in hospitals. My last hospital was very sad to see me resign. Nurses have been ranked the most honest and ethical profession by a Gallup poll for more than 20 years in a row. Firefighters scored higher for 1 year in 2001, which was after the 9/11 tragedy. I'm not a politician. I'm a nurse who is able to function in a high-stress, complex working environment. For over 2 decades, I've helped people navigate stressful, life and death, medical, and psychiatric problems. You can trust that I will bring my high ethical standards to Concord to represent you. I decided to run for this seat because I did not agree with the answers I received from my elected officials at all levels. I ran for supervisor of the checklist in Newbury this past March, but I wasn't elected. Other than that, I've never run for any office. I've taken 2 no new tax pledges, while no other candidate in this race has done so. You can trust me when I say that if I'm elected, I will not institute any broad-based taxes or income or sales or any increase in any New Hampshire tax. I've received a 100% rating with the granitestatetexpayers.org, while no other candidate in this race has received anywhere near a 100% rating. I received a grade A from Rebuild New Hampshire, while all other local New Hampshire House candidates have received grades of F, threat, or unknown. Rebuild New Hampshire is an all-volunteer grassroots organization that's devoted to getting New Hampshire back to work. It's devastating that households heating with oil will spend 27% more this winter than last winter. If your primary concern is surviving this recession and the 8.2% 12-month increase in the overall price of goods and services, and additionally the loss of your retirement savings, you might want to vote for me for New Hampshire House because I'm going to cut taxes. The New Hampshire advantage in tax policy must be maintained. The power to tax is the power to destroy. Bad federal policy will not be able to be reversed immediately. If elected, I will examine other New Hampshire taxes that can be cut, capped, or eliminated. Good tax policy matters to you, your family, and your business. Please vote for Claire Kettler on November 8th to keep your taxes low. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Sargent.
Hi, my name is Greg Sargent. I live around the corner from Claire in Newbury and pretty close to Dan as well. Some call us the Chalk Pond contingency. I am an attorney for the family business in New Hampshire. We employ 55 employees in Manchester. I am a graduate of our New Hampshire public school system. I graduated from UNH in Durham in 2001. I am running to protect rights, reproductive rights, LGBT rights, the right to privacy. I am also running to protect public education. In the early 2000s, I served on the Manchester School Board for one term as a 19-year-old. I've been a very big supporter of teachers and students my entire life, and I am aiming to protect all students in New Hampshire. As a business owner, I am also well aware of the current difficulties in hiring, and I'm working on that as a business, sorry, I don't own the business, my sister does, I'm the business operator. And I'm working to solve those daily, and looking for some legislative assistance in terms of daycare, in terms of some other incentives to assist with our hiring. What else have I done? I've also run a nonprofit for the last 6 years, which I am handing off to others. But it's an LGBT-focused ice hockey nonprofit that serves New England. We have 150 members, and we serve the community and provide a safe place to play ice hockey. So, with all of that, I would ask that you vote for 2 people on November 8th. And one of them being me. Thank you.
Representative Wolf.
Thanks to the League of Women Voters for hosting this forum, Pat for moderating it, and the other 3 candidates for showing up. Many of you know me and what I represent. Some of you who are out there in cyberspace may not know me. I live in Newbury with my wife, and we raise 2 children there. I've been a local businessman for over 50 years and have participated in numerous initiatives, ranging from establishing kindergarten in the Kearsarge School District, completing the new middle school, leading the restoration of a center meeting house, and developing a waterfront park in Newbury. I gave 17 years of service to the Colby Sawyer Board of Trustees. I can list accomplishments, but I'd rather take the balance of 3 minutes to let you know what my focus is going to be going forward. I believe that the primary function of government is to make people's lives better, and that will be done through consensus, compromise, and consideration for one's long-held beliefs. Nothing, I believe, is black or white. All of us have the ability to compromise, to find that gray area between darkness and light. I have been instrumental in my last 3 terms in the legislature in finding that balance. I worked with a group that we called ourselves the Problem Solvers, 30 men and women, young and old, from both parties, working together to try to come to a resolution of issues. It's almost impossible to say yes or no to an issue. And that's the reason why I'm not filling out surveys. I don't think you can be pigeonholed with a yes or a no or a 1 to 4. I'm a committed individual, and I am not bound by any party politics. I've always been available to answer questions and discuss issues. My home phone number is public, and I've often assisted constituents who felt their voices were not heard and were having trouble navigating the government process. No concern is too small for me as a legislator. I even ended up last spring tackling the problem of modifying the law so a vendor could put sauerkraut on a hot dog, serving it in Sunapee Harbor. So, from the large to the small, I hope you'll consider me, vote for me on November 8th. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Wolf. All right, first question, we'll begin with Ms. Ebel. If elected, what would you say are your top 2 priorities?
My top 2 priorities, wow, that's a really hard question because there's so many priorities. I frankly am really hoping to bring civility back to Concord, and so that we can all work together in a more open and friendly manner to solve the problems of the state of New Hampshire. My second priority, and I'm probably going to have a third, is public education. I feel that public education has really been under attack in the state of New Hampshire. the dwindling amounts of money that have been put into education, the creation of the school voucher program by the current Republican majority that is funneling money away from our public schools. I'm very concerned about the divisive concepts issue, and that really acts as like a ghost hovering over our teachers when they're supposed to be trying to teach an accurate reflection of our history here in the United States. So that's two. I guess I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Kettler?
I would say that my top issue would be the economy. It'd be interesting to hear what all you said, but so my big thing would be no new taxes in New Hampshire, no sales, income, or other broad-based tax, and that's to return money to you all. I would work really hard to restrain all the state spending, which could possibly even include some small across-the-board administrative cut to state government. I would cut or cap taxes when possible because people are suffering from this 8.2% inflation with very high food prices, record home heating costs, rising electricity costs, which are going to actually hit in December, when the average electricity bill is going to go up about 53%, maybe an average of what you pay now, $145 a month to $222, and people are going to have to choose between heating and eating. I would definitely consider cutting the business profits tax again. And this is because it's been proven to show since 2015 there have been 5 to 6 rounds of tax cuts, and we've gone in New Hampshire from the second slowest gross domestic product to the fastest in the nation, and so that's been helpful. I would consider cutting the business enterprise tax a tiny amount as well, as long as we continue to stay ahead in our budget surplus. And then I would accelerate the New Hampshire interest and dividends phase out, which is set for 2027. This will primarily affect seniors who are paying 5% on their interest and dividend income. Then I would continue to decrease regulations to encourage housing and commercial property growth, which would help with the affordable housing issue. And I think that my second one would be education, but I don't think I have time to talk about it, so I'm hoping I'll have another question. Oh, come on. Go for it. I don't think there's enough time. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Sargent.
Repealing the abortion ban is number one. Number two, supporting public education. That's it.
Thank you.
Those are my top two.
Mr. Wolf?
Thank you. I think the most important one at the top of the list is, as Karen said, civility, getting people to work together. If we don't get people to work and to compromise, we are not going to make any progress in this state. So I would put that at the top of my list. And the second thing that I would put would be setting up guardrails for education. Everybody is talking about the fact that money is going out, but to me what's more important is that there is no oversight on any of the other education initiatives. And I want to see oversight, I want to see protection of the product that we are trying to give our students.
Okay, thank you. All right, second question. Since we're on the subject of public education, we'll start with Ms. Kettler. And we're asking you, what do you see as the role of public education in our democracy?
That's a great question. So education is to help people get ready to live a life they're a productive citizen. So I know that in New Hampshire there's been a really big push for equity in education, but there's actually quite a lot of research that shows that and overwhelming evidence that education spending does not correlate to academic performance. So let me just go further in talking about education. So for me, I would expand the Education Freedom Savings Accounts to more New Hampshire students, and I would prevent any attempts to limit them. School choice has always been available to parents who can pay, and as a child, I benefited from that. I went to private schools. My children went to public schools, but I did choose that. Now children with education freedom accounts can, and their family income is less than 300% of the federal poverty level, they can have some money to choose their education. And in Kearsarge, about 23 students are choosing that this year, so it's not a huge amount. I don't want you to think it's a huge amount. I would, in education, I would prevent attempts to repeal the anti-discrimination law, which prohibits teaching of any divisive concepts such as racial superiority or inferiority. And I would prevent any mandates to any New Hampshire school choice program, because mandates prevent choice. Mandates always lose. Mandates aren't helpful. New Hampshire ranks in the top 5% of the nation in K through 12 educational outcomes. The cost per pupil in New Hampshire in 2018 was about $16,000 in local property taxes, and that's about 62% of the cost. And school districts get about $3,900 per student per year in funding from the state of New Hampshire. Kearsarge enrollment was about 2,000 students in 2006, and it fell to 1,700 students in 2016, and it's about stable there right now. And so I would just allow parents and students to choose the best schooling for that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Sargent?
Yeah, I think public education is a fundamental right. I think it offers everyone across the board the opportunity to succeed, to achieve their dreams. And I think that everyone is entitled to a safe environment in which to be educated. I think teachers play an amazingly important role in our society that is undervalued by many of us, and I've worked to change that. I believe that the UNH study that came out in 2020 or 2019 that talked about New Hampshire education funding and proposed new ways to fund it in implementing a student-centric formula to determine how much funding each local district should receive is the way to go. Ever since I can remember, education funding has been litigated. I don't know how many Claremont cases there have, 2, 3? How many? We're going to run out of Roman numerals on all the different cases that are coming out. When I was an intern in the New Hampshire Senate back in 2000, there was, education funding was a hot topic. Today, we have 2 or 3 lawsuits ongoing about education funding. So that's where I am. I support it. It's ultra important as a product of a public high school and a public university. It's very important. And when we have a voucher program and that takes away from the funding and is used mostly by students in parochial schools or in private schools, I don't think that was the intention, and it's not a program that I would support. So for me, it's implementing the recommendations that UNH came up with to ensure that every student in New Hampshire is offered the fundamental right to an appropriate and adequate and safe public education.
Okay. Mr. Wolf?
Thank you. Education is front and foremost, and I believe in that. Having served in this building on the school board for 10 years, 10 years as chairman, 11 years on the board, I've seen it, and I've seen what's gone on. We are very fortunate in Kearsarge that we have never but once rejected a budget. We accepted whatever the school board has asked for, they pay for, and you people pay for it. But there are other towns that are not, and are rejecting paying for education. I don't think it's a question of money, but we'll come back to that. But I think that right now the system is broken in that there's inequitable funding, and we have to correct that funding. The people, whether they're in a poor town, Newport, Bradford, they should get the same education that we have. The discrepancy in teachers' salaries is huge because they can't pay for it. So I would support equalizing that education, whether it be the UNH study or one of the studies that have come out from the Claremont lawsuits. There are ways to do that. But it is time to balance education so that everybody is getting an equal, fair education. Because whether I hire an employee from New London or I hire one from Berlin, they have to be educated. They have to know the same. The other thing that I would come back to is divisive concepts. I think that teachers should be allowed to teach. Right now, there, as somebody said, there is a sword hanging over their head. They don't know whether they're going to be sued, whether there is some concept that is inappropriate that they're being taught. For many, many years, we've never had a problem with what teachers were teaching. So I would support removing of the divisive concepts, and I would approve equal funding.
What is the role of education in democracy?
So in my view, education is a key leg to our democracy, and it needs to be funded, it needs to be equitable, and it needs to be supported at every juncture. Unfortunately, in our state and more broadly in this country at this time, there have been many groups that are starting to sow real distrust of public educators, teachers, school administrators, and a lot of that distrust is driving the multiplicity of bills that are pouring into the House, to the legislature at this time. One bill even sought to basically blow up all cooperative school districts, and there was no plan for what to do with them after that. I guess the one thing we've talked about, education freedom accounts. I call them a voucher system. We've heard various specifics about it. At this point, if you elect to leave the school system, you get $500,000 to $8,000 per child. The school district gets $3,700 approximately per student. Many students who never got the adequacy money before because they attended public school are now getting it. So even though the Department of Education commissioner estimated that $129,000 would result from the passage of the school voucher system, it's now up to $8 million, and it's projected to be $23 million over the next biennium. There's been some discussion of taxes here. I want everybody to understand that the more you cut taxes at the state level, you still have to educate your children, you still have to pave your roads, you still have to plow. There are many, many things that have to be supported by taxes, and if you continually cut what we have at the state level, you have more and more that has to be supported by property taxes. And all you have to do is look at the situation in New Hampshire for property taxes, and you know what I say is true. They are very regressive.
Okay, thank you. All right, next questions begin with Mr. Sargent. In light of the Supreme Court decision to repeal Roe v. Wade, do you believe we need laws in New Hampshire pertaining to reproductive rights? And what laws would you support or oppose?
The passage of, or the 5-4 decision in Dobbs, or 5-3, shifted the power over reproductive rights from the federal government to the state legislatures. That's why I'm running. The Congress is not going to be able to pass anything. Nothing is going to make it through the Senate in terms of reproductive rights. Nothing positive, nothing protecting them. Nothing that protects a pregnant person and their ability to work with their doctor and to decide what they want to do with their life. So in New Hampshire, we have the 24-week abortion ban. That does have some exceptions that were added to it after the fact. That abortion ban passed with the 2021, is that correct? 2021 budget. It was an add-on. That, the divisive concepts law, the voucher program, and a few other things were all added into the budget and passed. So do we need laws on it? Yes, we need laws on it to repeal what has happened or to mitigate what has happened, depending on the makeup of the state legislature and what we can get passed. And what would I do? I'd work to repeal the existing ban And if that doesn't work, I would work to mitigate its effects.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Wolf?
You asked the question of what laws do we need to have to protect the woman's right to choose. Very simply, we need to go back to 2021 when we didn't have any laws in the state of New Hampshire. But I have worked hard. Last year, I brought about Bill 1609, which allowed an abortion to continue or occur after 24 weeks if there was a fatal fetal anomaly. I got rid of the requirement for a ultrasound, whatever it's called, ultrasound. I worked hard for a woman to be able to have the rights that I think she should have. So a ban on abortion that went in was wrong. We worked very well in New Hampshire for many, many years without having laws prohibiting it. I will work to open up the laws from what they are right now. Right now, you cannot have an abortion after 24 weeks. But more importantly, right now we've criminalized a doctor who does that. There's a huge fine. There's jail terms of 7 years if a doctor should perform an abortion. So I am, in this area, I am pro-choice. I think that we need to take back the bills that were passed and snuck in the legislature, because I firmly believe that divisive concepts, educational freedom accounts, and the abortion bills would never have passed if they weren't snuck into the budget at the very end of the legislative session. And I will work very hard to get rules that prohibit putting bills into the legislature that have not been adequately aired before term.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Ebel?
Thank you very much. I have to say that the overturning of Roe v. Wade after 50 years of being in place to protect a woman's right to choose, I feel was wrong, and the decision to leave it to legislatures through open, chaotic situation that we are observing today. It concerns me particularly because state legislatures can gerrymander our voting districts to affect how the outcomes are, and the state legislatures could become very extreme and just pass very difficult laws. I actually co-sponsored a bill to ensure abortion care in the state of New Hampshire, which the Republicans killed. I'm very concerned that the 24-week ban was put into place with criminal penalties. The exclusion is to save the life of the mother, and I ask any of you, how do you decide how close to death a mother has to be before you decide whether or not you can give the woman an abortion? And what about the doctor who faces a criminal penalty for giving an abortion when he knows that after 24 weeks, when he knows that some government official may be looking over his shoulder to make sure that that woman was close enough to death before he gave the abortion to save her life? I'm sorry, I just think it's outrageous, and I would work to repeal that law. In fact, I want to say today, just today, in the House Judiciary Committee, 7 Republicans voted in support of legislation that would permit a man to seek and get a preliminary injunction to block an abortion, and he didn't even have to, and in this case, he didn't even have to show DNA to prove paternity rights. We have to go back to the way we were before the governor signed the Sununu abortion ban.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Kettler?
Could you just repeat the question again? It's been a long time.
Okay. In light of the Supreme Court decision to repeal Roe v. Wade, do you believe we need laws in New Hampshire pertaining to reproductive rights? And what laws would you support or oppose?
Okay, thank you. So right now, we do have a current law, and the current New Hampshire law is called the Fetal Life Protection Act, which prohibits abortion after 24 weeks of gestation, except if the mother's life is endangered or her physical health is endangered, or if there's a fatal fetal anomaly, which means the baby's not going to live after being born. So this is basically a late-term abortion ban. So I just want to give you a couple facts here. In 2000, I would support that. In 2022, the Goodamaker organization published an estimate that 54% of all abortions are by medication, and they occur before 13 weeks of gestation. In 2019, the CDC published data from 42 states that about 93% of all abortions occurred at or before 13 weeks. 6.2% occurred between 14 and 20 weeks of gestation, and less than 1% were performed at 21 weeks or more. Pew Research added additional data saying that 58% of abortions were the first abortion, 24% were a second, 11% were a third abortion, and 8% were a fourth or higher abortion for the same woman. In 2005, Goodamaker.org published the reasons why women have abortions after conducting interviews with 1,200 women at 11 large abortion sites, and this is what they said. 74% said a child would interfere with education, work, or ability to care for dependents. 73% said they couldn't afford a baby now. 48% did not want to be a single mother or were having relationship problems. 40% said they completed their childbearing. 33% said they weren't ready to have a child, and about 1% were maybe due to rape. It's not quite clear about that. So the Democrats will often say that they want abortion for any reason up till birth, but women don't choose that. I've worked in women's health with women who have babies and their life is in danger, and at 24 weeks, they want the baby to survive. So I would support current law. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, we begin the next round with Mr. Wolf. One of the issues in New Hampshire is affordable housing. What do you believe the state should do to increase the supply of affordable housing?
I believe the state has to come up with some sort of system to subsidize, and by subsidy, I mean to offset the cost in the financing of affordable housing. For years back, we had Section 8 housing, which was built for elderly, for those that were disabled. We have two Section 8 projects, I believe, here in New London. We have one in Newbury, and they were subsidized by government-financed mortgages. They weren't giveaways. They were mortgages at low interest rates that allowed somebody to build a housing complex. I think that that is the biggest way to do affordable housing. And Farmers Home Administration, single-family homes, could be built with government-supported loans. I am not in favor of providing free housing, but I am in favor of having housing that people pay for, pay back, and we will provide the housing in that manner. Some of it is local control. I'm opposed to changing zoning ordinance at a state level. I think there is plenty of opportunity if the funding is there. So I am in favor of having government subsidized funding.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Ebel?
Thank you very much. Obviously, affordable housing is an incredible problem for our economy, and it's really important that we find places for people to live, not just because we want people to be able to work in our area, which is a very good reason, but we need to provide security to our homes, to the homeless, and to our children so they can thrive. I agree with Representative Wolf that the best way we can approach this is by helping with subsidization of state funding for affordable housing. In fact, on the Public Works Committee during the capital budget process, I was very supportive of adding funds for the Housing Authority so that it could be disseminated properly. You will find that in my voting record, I am not supportive of statewide mandates on zoning, even though I think their hearts are in a good place. I mean, if you know, I was on the planning board here in New London for 18 years. I'm very committed to local control, and I think that municipalities should be given the opportunity to look closely at their own towns and come up with local solutions. So that's my recommendation.
Ms. Kettler?
So I think that affordable housing has been an issue as long as I've lived here. It was difficult for me to afford my first home, and it's been difficult for my children to afford their first home, and with my assistance, they've had some help. So I think that one important thing is that New Hampshire's taxes need to be low as possible. This is a very expensive part of the country to live in, and of course, we're going to have an affordable housing problem. If you keep our tax rates low, businesses will be able to offer higher wages, and then they can also offer employee housing. And if we keep regulations off of businesses' back, and the regulations minimal, they'll be able to respond to market forces, and then employees will demand housing as a part of that. I don't believe that meddling in markets improves them at all. I don't believe government subsidies or helping people buy homes when they can't really afford them is a good option. And I just would allow market forces to influence wages and employment perks. And I think New Hampshire businesses will step up and get very innovative. I do believe towns could streamline their own regulations to encourage affordable housing that might actually benefit homeowners as well, like single-family lots could have accessory apartments. And I know that's allowed in Newbury. I don't know whether it's allowed in New London, but that's certainly an option. And it could be a win-win for the single-family owner and someone who needs the affordable housing.
Thank you. Mr. Sargent?
I agree with many things that people have said here. It's a holistic approach that's required to solve the affordable housing crisis that is in New Hampshire, that's in New London. From speaking with the president of our local hospital, who has a hard time bringing employees in because they can't find housing here. It's a nationwide problem, and it stems from numerous things. It stems from over-restrictive zoning and planning at the local level. It stems from just the nature of the house as an asset, and that, built into that asset, built into that mindset, is that our values are going to keep going up. And so many of us prefer not to have certain things happen near where we live because it might affect the potential for that value to go up. Discrimination within the mortgage process, discrimination within, your bank systems, all of those things have led to the housing crisis that we're in. So how do we solve this? The question was, what can the state do? I agree with Representative Wolf. The state can have targeted subsidies. Not to the same extent that the federal government can, because we have a much smaller pot of money. But that's one thing that we can do. The second thing a state can do, I do believe that there should be some changes to the zoning and planning statutes and the enabling acts to make at least some portion of some towns not subject to overly restrictive zoning and planning. And I would have to rely on the experts in the industry to tell me more detail on that. I know that density requirements should be lessened, but not saying across all the town, right? Like not all of New London. But I would rely on the experts to inform me.
Okay.
The home, is the greatest. It's the greatest sense of protection for a family. So I think if you look at the numbers from COVID, people who had houses did much better. People who had a savings account with enough money to survive for a few months were able to protect themselves and their family and their home. And that's why this issue is important to me.
Thank you. All right, we begin this round with Ms. Ebel again, and the subject is climate change. Many states have enacted legislation to control the effects of climate change. California with electric cars, New York with no plastic bags, emission controls on businesses in some states. Do you believe that New Hampshire should take a more activist position, and how?
Well, my answer to that is yes, in all capital letters. I definitely believe that New Hampshire should take a more active role than it has in climate change. Unfortunately, we lag behind our states, other states, because mostly the Republican administrations have really put the kibosh on energy efficiency spending. They actually passed a law that Sununu signed, that banned DES from participating in regional discussions on better low-carbon fuels. The staff at DES is not allowed to discuss it. There was money from the VW settlement that could be used for EV infrastructure. It only recently has been released. Sununu has been sitting on it for quite a while. We really have to step up the amount of electronic vehicle infrastructure for recharging. Democrats have tried to introduce rules for us to have a statewide climate action plan. That has been killed by the Republican majorities. I, of course, am really involved in the solid waste issue. We really have to do a much better job with the things that we are landfilling. Many things produce greenhouse gases. Food waste in particular kicks out methane. We have to do better in that regard. So unfortunately, the state is behind, and I do very firmly believe, I do believe in climate change, and I do believe that it's man-made, and I do believe that we can take actions to counteract it, and that the state needs to step up.
Thank you. Ms. Kettler.
I don't think New Hampshire should do anything basically different. In January 2021, President Biden, with one pen stroke, canceled the energy independence of the United States, and which started a negative ripple effect that transferred to every single sector of the U.S. economy and every single family in the U.S. Along with other Biden administration policy blunders and bad decisions, the U.S. now has an 8.2% inflation rate as of this month, and people are going to have to start choosing between heating and eating this winter. Maybe not everyone. The Biden administration is mandating certain initiatives with no regard for the ability of markets to support the mandate, and we'll take, for example, electric cars, since you brought that up. Electric cars are extremely expensive, and the average American is never going to be able to afford one. Electric cars are powered by electricity, which means there's going to be an increase in the demand for electricity. Green methods of electricity production, like wind and solar, are very, very expensive and very unreliable. And even worse, wind and solar rely on getting metals from mining in other countries, because that mining is banned here or heavily regulated. Canceling U.S. energy independence and making mandates on the federal level has been a disaster for everyday New Hampshire people who have to choose now for what they can afford. If green energy ideas were allowed to advance on their own by market forces, the results would be entirely different. Most importantly, there's no climate crisis, and there's no reason for all of this federal energy policy fiasco. The alleged climate crisis is propped up by big tech and their elitist allies who want to transfer all of your hard-earned money to them and make you their economic slaves. The truth is available for all to read and investigate, but is heavily censored because truth would change people's minds and then would set people free from economic slavery.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Sargent.
I believe in climate change. I believe it's happening. I believe that we as humans have exacerbated things dramatically. I think for our children, I think for myself and for all of us, that the state shouldn't take an activist role. It should take a protectivist role on the climate. It should be doing everything it can be doing to make sure that the air we breathe is clean, the water we drink is clean, the soil that our kids play in is not contaminated. And I could go on, and I support every single type of renewable energy project. It's also a national security issue. Now, we in New Hampshire don't think much about national security because, we're pretty small. pretty close to Canada, but we do have a nuclear power plant, right? We are pretty close to Boston. We are pretty close to New York. So we should be considering some national security issues. Look at what's happening. This over-reliance on natural gas is causing, the skyrocketing prices, also affecting inflation. If we weren't so reliant on the fossil fuels, our world would be different, national security-wise, economically, and our air, soil, water would be different as well. So huge supporter of it, willing to work in any way possible to make it happen. In the current times, willing to do that and not to have it affect inflation and to work hard against it having a negative effect on inflationary pressures.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. If anybody doesn't believe in global warming, come down to my sugar house. We're up on the wall for 35 years is the date that we started first boiling. That's gone from mid-March to late January. It's much, much warmer, almost 2 months warmer than it used to be. So I believe in global warming. Just come and look at the numbers on the wall. But more important, I've been a supporter of alternative energy for years. Supported the biomass plant. When we built Kearsarge Regional High School, that is fueled by wood chips 15 years ago, or 18 years ago, I think it was. So I've thought about that, and I'm a big, big supporter of alternative fuels. And it not necessarily have to be subsidized. The school district did not subsidize. The Newbury Energy Committee next week will be doing the ribbon cutting on a solar plant, I think 110 kW, that's going to power the wastewater treatment plant in Blodgett Landing, and at no cost to the town. So it can be done. And if we get our abilities to move forward and shut down some of the people that say the climate isn't changing, we will then be able to have affordable energy that's renewable and cheaper. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And you're welcome to ask for any of these questions to be repeated. The next one is about election law, and we're going to start with Ms. Kessler. There are a lot of questions about the way elections are run, and would you change anything about the voting process in New Hampshire, considering the following areas: voter suppression, voter accessibility, use of absentee ballots or mail-in ballots? Do you think we need to change anything about the current voting crisis, and what would be your suggestions to restore voter confidence?
Thank you. You said there was a voter crisis, is that what you said?
Crisis of confidence, yes.
Okay. So I guess New Hampshire has a couple of problems from my point of view. Actually, we're in a pretty good state compared to other places. We still have paper ballots. I would get rid of affidavit voting. I think that it doesn't serve us well. That means same-day affidavit voting. People come in and they say, I just moved here and I want to vote, because we never go back and check those affidavits. And that's not probably a really big issue, but I think it would be good to clean things up. And that would make people trust the elections more, because they're not worried about people being bussed into a big city voting. That would help with confidence. I would get rid of the electronic vote counting machines. I trust my local officials in Newbury and New London to hand count the paper ballots, and that electronic voting machines came in many, many years ago as an experiment, and they've stayed, and they're very convenient, but we don't really need them. And for me and many people that I know, that might help increase voter confidence in the process. I think that there's possibly something that could go wrong, but I trust my local officials. And then the other thing is I would not allow college students to vote in New Hampshire, and that's current law. College students that vote will generally not be sticking around to be subject to the laws that they voted for. They'll move on to somewhere else. They do have the ability to vote by absentee ballot, and our absentee ballot process works wonderfully in New Hampshire, no problems with that, and they can choose to do that. So that's what I would do. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Sargent.
I have a slightly different.
So first, I believe in expanding access to voting, making it simpler. I think that electronic machines are perfectly fine to use. I think that hand counting is also a perfectly fine way to do it, but might be administratively difficult. So I've been looking into some voting like research that's out there, and neither side we don't talk about it, and I'm on the Democrat side. But for all the laws that are passed that restrict voting, studies show that it doesn't actually turn voters away. Like, they still vote in similar numbers. And so, we react strong to what the Republicans do. And then the reason for these laws is supposed voter fraud that just doesn't exist. And so the Republicans are overreacting. Don't get me wrong, I believe that mail-in ballots should be easier. I think that COVID brought a wave of change and made it significantly easier to vote with no indication of fraud. And that's what I would support. I would support mailboxes down in the corner here where you can drop off your ballot. I support early voting. I support same-day sign-up, same-day registration. Of course college kids should vote. As long as they're of age and they're subject to our laws for any period of time, of course they should have the right to vote.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Wolf.
Thank you. I believe, as the Secretary of State said, they went around the state, they had hearings, and there was no evidence of fraud in New Hampshire. There have been mistakes. Everybody makes a mistake. But there have been no evidence of fraud of any systemic way. I support the electronic counting machine. I know my daughter, who counts ballots up in Holderness, which is a third the size of Newbury, was up until after midnight counting 285 ballots because they had to go through it by hand. And they have now troubles getting ballot clerks. So we have a good system. You have a paper system, it goes through a counter, and if there's ever a question, you have the paper to back it up. I think the system works very, very well. I've worked with the League of Women Voters on some of the questionable problems of getting access to the ballots, to registration. I don't personally see that. I think that everybody has a reasonable chance to get to a voting poll. And I think that we have to just continue to open it up. I would like to see that there are no restrictions. I think the biggest restriction that we have is the gerrymandering process when the legislature apportions itself. That then puts groups of people in certain silos, and I don't like that. So I think the system is working very well in New Hampshire. We should be proud of it, and I'd like to keep it very much as it is.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Ebel.
Thank you. I was struck by the question that said that there was a crisis in voter confidence. I don't believe that there is a crisis in voter confidence, except among people who believe our president when he said that he won the election and caused riots on January 6th and refused to accept the fact that there should be a peaceful transfer of power. I believe that the myth of the loss of his election has caused people all over this country, particularly in the Republican Party, to continue to assert that there's fraud in our elections and use that as an excuse to continue to pass laws that further suppress voting. In the state of New Hampshire, there are many people that continue to introduce bills that try to restrict the right to vote. There was a question earlier about what role did I think education played in democracy? Vital. What's another role that is absolutely vital in our democracy? That is the right to vote. People should be able to vote by absentee ballots without excuse. That's something that the Republicans refuse to let us do. You know, if you're standing in line to vote, somebody ought to be able to bring you water. I think that same-day registration is okay. Let's not forget that one of the reasons we had that is because a lot of people in a lot of states were going to registration on the day that you register your car in a state, and New Hampshire didn't want to do that. Honestly, I do not think that there's a crisis. I believe in our Secretary of State when he says there's no fraud. And as I asserted earlier, I think the promotion of the myth that elections are being stolen by fraud is perpetrating a further restriction of our voting rights that I think is abhorrent.
Thank you. Okay, we start the next round with Mr. Sargent, and it is, as a legislator, would you support the sale of recreational marijuana in New Hampshire, and why?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Wolf?
No, I'm not done. So for numerous reasons. One, I think it criminalizes activity that shouldn't be criminalized and has had a disproportionate effect on people of color over the years. Two, I think that every other state surrounding us and Canada, if I'm correct, all have legalized it and all are receiving, tax revenue from the sale of it. Three, I don't think it's a public health nuisance. Four, I actually think the revenue from it can be used for public education. Five, I think it can address, like I said, this historical discrimination by if we focus. It's an opportunity. I would be opposed to having it being sold at the state liquor stores. I think it's an opportunity to have people that have been historically oppressed by the marijuana laws own the companies that are selling it, own the companies that are growing it, own the companies that are distributing it. I think it's a phenomenal opportunity if done right.
Mr. Wolf?
I agree that we should legalize marijuana. It's a change in pace of mine, but I've seen what's happened in all of our surrounding states. I'm not going to do it for revenue because we're too late in the game. Massachusetts exists, Vermont, Maine, and yes, you're right, Mr. Sargent, Canada now legalizes it. So I think that the time has come. We are doing nothing good by restricting the use in recreational marijuana possession. I've talked to our local police chiefs. They're almost ambivalent about it. So I would legalize marijuana.
Thank you. Ms. Ebel?
Thank you. I will admit that I've had very mixed feelings over the years on this issue. I'm very cognizant of the opioid crisis in the state of New Hampshire, and I've listened a lot to the police chiefs, and I've listened a lot to my constituents. And I will say that when I was first elected, my constituents, I felt, were quite opposed to the legalization of marijuana. I feel that they're transitioning at this point, and I'm hearing more in favor of marijuana. I voted for the first time ever in the past term to legalize it, to have it sold through liquor stores, and to have, that sort of control on it. I know that a lot of people didn't vote for it, actually, not because they were opposed to the legalization of marijuana, but because the way the bill was written, they didn't think that there was enough revenue coming in. I would be supportive if one was going to legalize marijuana. I think one of the big reasons to do it is revenue, because even though the area states are getting revenue at this point, if we legalize it in the state of New Hampshire, that means that money that is going out of the state to purchase it would stay. So I'm much more favorably inclined, with some misgivings, than I used to be. I'm going to be listening to my constituents, and I'm going to be paying very close attention to the sorts of bills that are put forward, and any vote that I take will be very well considered, so that I feel in my heart I can support it. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Kettler.
I'm just ambivalent about the legalization of marijuana. It's not an important issue to me. If it's an important issue to voters, I'm willing to listen to what they have to say. I don't think that New Hampshire has to join all the surrounding states just because they've done it. We can be unique here. We don't have to legalize it if it isn't legalized. But if people feel really strongly, I'm willing to work with them and listen to them. But it's not a really important issue as far as I can see. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, begin the next round with Mr. Wolf, and the question comes from the audience concerning the ballot in November. Would you please explain the constitutional question and your position on it?
I believe there are 2 amendments to the Constitution. I can come up with one, which is doing away with the Register of Probate. And according to my good friend Donna Sitek, who was president of the Senate and proposed this amendment to the Constitution, since the Register of Probate has nothing to do, has no legal responsibilities, and has voted to do away with it, I would certainly agree that it should be done away with. It's an unnecessary position. It gives you a title on the wall, and you get the little gold seal from the governor. And I don't remember what the second one is. Thank you. Oh, the Constitutional Convention. No, I'm opposed to that one. I think that if we need to have a Constitutional Convention, there are other ways to do it than changing the Constitution. I think the Constitution is good, and it should be very limited on what we do to change it.
Okay. Ms. Ebel.
I think to get the best answer to this question, you should look at the League of Women Voter flyers over there. But basically, the court system was rearranged. I think it was in 2011, and a lot of the jobs that the Register of Probate was doing have been redistributed, and it's not really necessary to have this position anymore. So I would support removing a reference to it in our Constitution. Like Representative Wolf, I would be opposed to a constitutional convention. There are just too many things that could happen as part of the convention. I would be extremely concerned that it would become a very partisan discussion, and I'm not sure how that would work. I will say I think that there's interest in this, in particular in the state of New Hampshire, because unlike many other states, they have voter referenda. So if you know, like a lot of times people may hear that there are statewide referenda on any number of issues. In fact, it's frequently the case that marijuana was legalized due to voter referenda and not by acts of the legislature. Anyway, because we don't have that option, there is frequently interest in a constitutional convention. I think it's fraught, and I would oppose it.
Ms. Kettler.
Well, so I will admit that I do not know enough about the questions, and I, like a good voter, will have to do my research before I go to the polls, and so I can't give any advice. And so I urge everybody here to do their research as well, because sometimes you just come across an issue and it deserves a lot of research. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Sargent?
Yeah, I support getting rid of the probate position. I would also support getting rid of some of the other county positions and making them appointed or at least subject to some qualifying credentials. So if I wanted to, I could run for county attorney. I have zero experience prosecuting criminal cases. I am an attorney, but I would not put myself in that seat or run for it because I'm not qualified. I'll be honest, I don't know if that is a constitutional position or not, but this whole probate position brings that up in my mind. So you have the county attorneys elected, well, your county sheriffs are elected as well. I'm sure there are numerous other positions. That would be interesting to look at. As to the Constitutional Convention, if the legislature doesn't vote in favor of having one, then the voters get to, so the legislature has to vote it up or down every 10 years, and if they don't, then it goes to the voters to have this question face them. As an attorney, it's an intriguing question, right? You always love to tweak the founding documents. That's what they're there for. They're there to grow and to be live, and touching them every 10 years seems okay. But I am okay with our New Hampshire Constitution as it is. I wish we would implement the cherishing of public education a little better, but I don't think a constitutional amendment is going to fix that. I think that is more of a process. How do we implement what we already have? So I don't support having a constitutional convention at this time.
Okay, and we thank you for the plug for the League of Women Voters. We have no position on this issue, but we do have material that explains the question, which you're very welcome to pick up on your way out. Okay, we're beginning with Mr. Wolf. If you are reelected as our state representative, what would be your #1 committee dream assignment?
Whoa. I was on the Education Committee for 2 terms, and it became overwhelming. I still have a business that I'm running, and with don't hold me to the number, 113 bills last time around, I just couldn't afford the time in Concord. I've been on Fish and Game. I've enjoyed that. I care about the open space in New Hampshire, protecting the resources. And I guess I can find a balance between devoting the time that's needed for committee meetings and hearings and protecting the environment. So I'm happy where I am as a committee assignment, but there are a lot of things that I do that are not part of it. I was appointed to the Holocaust and Genocide Education Commission 2 years ago. We now have mandated in the public schools a course from grades 5 through 12 where they have to learn about Holocaust, genocide, and the effects that it has and what it will bear to our state. There are other things that I can do, and as I said, 1609 took a lot of time last year to allow for an abortion in the case of a fatal fetal anomaly. So where I sit on Fish and Game allows me to work on other projects as well. And I guess I'll be happy where I am and make it work.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Ebel?
I've been on Public Works and Highways for 10 years. As I said, that is the capital budget, infrastructure. It's a very interesting committee. I've learned a lot. It is very bipartisan, and I feel that I've really been able to do things, good things for our area and for the state because I'm on it. I feel that I'm ready to move on and try something new. So if whoever the new speaker is, if you can hear me, I'd like to move to finance. And in particular, I'd like to move on to Division 1, if I could, because that is where the budgets of many of our state agencies are. And I think it would be really interesting, and it would be a nice change for me.
Ms. Kettler?
I'm not really sure of the names of all the committees, but I guess being a registered nurse, I would be interested in a committee that has to deal with health care, health choices, insurance, like medical and health insurance and choices like that. I would be interested in other things related to that. And I'm not really sure how they all line up, but I'm interested in that. Thank you.
Mr. Sargent?
I'll go where needed. My list is extensive. Education and judiciary are kind of tied for top 2. So I'll just leave it there.
You've all answered that question, so we're moving on, and we are beginning with Ms. Ebel. It's a very general question. This is from the audience. What do you think can be done about inflation?
Oh, man, too bad I'm first. No, I'm just going to say that inflation is such a multifaceted issue. I think a lot of things are being pinned on the current administration, even though there are supply chain problems, there are global fuel problems, there is the war in Ukraine, there's any number of issues that relate to inflation. I am not sure what, as a state legislator, a person can do to bring inflation down. A lot of it seems to relate to the use of fossil fuels. It's not really within our power to decrease those. I do think one of the ways that we could help the situation is to support renewable energy and energy efficiency, so that over time we can start to bring our energy costs down. Wow. That's all I can really think of. I mean, obviously, somebody's going to say that we can cut taxes. You know, our taxes in the state of New Hampshire are pretty low overall as you compare to other states. And it's difficult at the state level to do a lot if you don't want to just have a corresponding increase in property taxes. Anything we could do to help with affordable housing, rents, we've talked about that issue. And, you know, I do a lot with solid waste, and I think if we weren't throwing so much stuff away and we were focused more on reuse instead of constant consumption, we probably would help ourselves in keeping our pocketbooks a little fuller. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kettler?
So there's really nothing that any of us can do on the state level, you or me as a state, if I was elected state legislature, to deal with inflation. But I suppose as a voter, you can choose to elect different people. If you choose a different person on the state level, like a state house, they're not going to be able to affect inflation. But on the federal level, the people that you elect could make a difference. If we were able to get energy independent again, it would decrease inflation, but it would take a while. So the only thing you can do in New Hampshire is to counteract it by doing other things. We can't change the rate of inflation, you just have to deal with it. And so that's why I would say cut taxes, restrain state spending. And, you know, New Hampshire had a budget surplus of $252 million this year. That was above the projections. And so the legislature voted to send that budget surplus back to the cities and towns for property tax relief. I don't know if any of you got it, but I know that some Democrats voted against that. And then the legislature cut the business profits tax a tiny amount. So, I mean, and then other things, but basically it's how you vote at the federal level. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sargent.
So I think we need to be prepared to help those that are most in need through this time. And I think we as a state and the legislature and our state agencies should be ready to offer targeted aid to those in need, whether it be with home heating costs, or I guess if you heat with electricity costs, the food costs, your basic food, and being ready to assist with that. As to whether we can have an effect on inflation or not, I'm not an inflation scholar, and it's a fascinating concept, right? If we all believe that it's happening, it's happening. If we don't, then it stops it. I would lowering the business taxes might actually be an inflationary cause to some extent. Now, New Hampshire is relatively small compared to the whole world and to the United States, so the effect would be very, very small and minuscule. But that would be something to consider when you were considering lowering taxes. What is the effect of that on the existing inflationary environment that we're in? So I would take a look at that before I would support doing anything like that.
Okay. Mr. Wolf?
I think there's very little that we can do on the state level to reduce inflation. I would say, though, that the number is close to $400 million of surplus that the state had. And I'm not sure that giving that money back to the towns and cities would benefit people the same way that putting it back into our infrastructure. We have a crumbling infrastructure out there, and all you need to do is go look underneath the bridges on 89 and see what's going on. I think part of that 400 million, if not a big chunk of it, should be put away for long-term maintenance of our infrastructure. Our roads, our sewers, our water systems, they're in trouble. And if we wait, it's only going to get more expensive. Right now, we've got a huge pot of money that can be directed to making things smoother over the next decade or two if we put it back in. So I'm not sure it's an answer for inflation, but I know it's an answer that we have the ability to rebuild our infrastructure and use it for that.
Okay, thank you. Well, and we thank you for your responses to all these questions. We've now reached the portion of the forum where we will have closing statements, and we will reverse the order. So we begin with Mr. Wolf.
I didn't know you were going to do it that way, Matt. Thank you. And thank you all for coming, and as I looked around with such rapt attention to our answers. There are three things that were in the last legislative bill, the budget in 21, the divisive concepts, the educational freedom account, and the abortion legislation. I would work to bring those back, eliminate them the way they were, or at the very minimum, have a discussion with people of various persuasions to find common ground on how we can maintain those. The other thing that I think is very important, Aaron touched on it earlier, and I'll touch on it again, is the divisiveness within our electoral bodies. It is very difficult to be in the legislature right now. I had an experience, not this past term, but 2 terms ago, because of the way I voted. Somebody was about to get in the elevator, they saw me and they said, no, I'll wait for the next elevator. That's not the way to be if we're going to be a collaborative state. So we need to work to get over that hatred, unwillingness to work together, and the ability to move New Hampshire forward together. That's what I would like to do. And with your help on November 8th, I'll go back there and try to get on that elevator one more time. Thank you.
Mr. Sargent.
I tend to find myself agreeing with many things that many of these speakers have said, including with Representative Wolf. I agree that the divisive concepts is a bad law. I agree that the original 24-week abortion ban is a bad law. And I agree that the school voucher program is a bad law. But I wouldn't have voted for the state budget that had those laws in it. Why? Because I'm on the D side. So when you're a Republican, it's very difficult not to vote for your party's budget. Very difficult not to vote for the candidate for speaker. I also agree that we all need to work together. You know, people have asked me, how can we work? How can the different sides? How can someone that voted for Donald Trump work and enjoy life with someone that voted for President Biden? And I say, you know, we have to do activities together. I made a pond hockey rink, very simple, very basic, on Chalk Pond with one of my neighbors that had a Trump sign in front of his house. I did not have a Trump sign in front of my house. But you know what? He and I are now friends. We're gonna work together and do another pond hockey tournament this year. This is how I think it starts. So I would always get in the elevator with you, Representative Wolf, every single time. Thank you very much.
Ms. Kettler.
Thank you for the opportunity to address the voters of New London and Newbury and having this forum. It's my pleasure to offer my volunteer time and talent to serve in the New Hampshire House. You can be assured that I will represent the voters as a strong, ethical, and trusted voice. And these are the qualities that I've embodied throughout my 23 years working as a registered nurse and now small business owner. My stance for no new taxes, no income or sales tax, and also to cut or cap taxes where possible is a breath of fresh air to voters who are suffering under oppressive inflation and the ever-increasing cost of living, including high food prices, skyrocketing home heating bills, and the 50% increase in electric rates. Federal policies instituted in 2021 are the wrong path, and they're destroying New Hampshire, our New Hampshire advantage. But these damaging policies are not quickly reversed. But I'll do all that's in my power so that each resident in these towns keeps as much of their hard-earned money as possible and is not subjected to an oppressive federal mandate and is also free to work and live the way they want to live. The power to tax is the power to destroy. I've received a 100% rating by the Granite State Taxpayers Association and signed 2 no new tax pledges. I've received a grade of A from Rebuild New Hampshire, and I've been endorsed by Citizens Alliance New Hampshire and New Hampshire Cornerstone. And I look forward to hearing from voters and rolling up my sleeves and getting to work on our economy. And I ask for your vote on November 8th. And I will work with anyone. I can talk with people. Please look at my website and contact me. It's clairekettler.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Ebel.
Thank you very much, and thank you again to the League of Women Voters for hosting this. It really has been my privilege to work for the people of New London and Newbury for the past 10 years. I want to go back to Concord. I want to try to bring civility back. I will say that it becomes increasingly difficult when you have probably 25 to 30% of the legislature that currently opposes public education as we all know it, I've quoted before the current majority leader who said that one way of promoting gun safety in schools is by training all children appropriately in school for guns and how to use them. I will say that Rebuild New Hampshire was a group that was protesting, I believe, in front of Governor Sununu's house related to the actions that he took during the COVID pandemic, and they're opposed to vaccination requirements and things of that nature. So I am not endorsed by Rebuild New Hampshire, and that is all right with me. I mean, it's a different belief, but anyway. So I will definitely work to promote reproductive rights and try to bring New Hampshire back into alignment with our freedoms. We believe in live free or die. Well, I would say our freedoms are being undermined, our freedom to go to school safely, our freedom to seek our personal autonomy and our right to vote. And I'm extremely concerned about what the future brings if the trajectory of the state continues the way it has been. Thank you very much for your support in the past, and I hope you'll support me again to represent you in the next election.
Thank you. And the League would like to thank all of you voters for coming out in the evening and giving us the time to demonstrate for you a free and open and fair exchange of ideas. And we'd like to thank the candidates because it takes, I think, a great deal of thoughtfulness and courage to put yourself forward for public office. So we thank you for doing that. And